Welcome back to International Wealth Builders Radio Talk Show. I am your host, Michelle Estelle, your home buyer coach, coming to you on KCAA 1050 AM and 106.5 FM. So in our last two segments, we spent time on credit and credit scores, and I hope that information was helpful to you in building your credit and understanding your credit. Now we're kind of going to delve into just a topic of generational wealth. That has become kind of a buzzword over time. And this radio show is really just for opinion, discussion, information. And I am not advising directly anybody do any one thing or think anything or believe one thing. But these are kind of my thoughts about generational wealth. And I'm giving them to you so that you can also think about it, like these aha type of things that come to mind sometimes when people talk about generational wealth. One thing is that most of the time people talk about generational wealth because they're selling you something. And they're creating a sense of this legacy or missing out on an opportunity or looking at time in a different way. And so there's just a few things I want to bring up about generational wealth to think about this. The fact that if you don't do something, you won't have generational wealth. And if you do something, then you will. And it kind of gives you the idea that if you are, for instance, to buy a home, that you create generational wealth. And buying a home is an amazing investment opportunity, and it can be wonderful for the downline generation, both in the sense of education and in the sense of an asset for the family in the future. And so buying a home is really an honor and an amazing thing. And what it means to someone to own a home and what that does to the stability of a family and this sense of building memories and security and just where people really create that family bond and whatever family that it is extremely important. And I would never minimize that because we have to have shelter. So we're spending money on shelter. And if you are renting either by choice or by necessity, that is money that doesn't grow, that money doesn't appreciate, that money doesn't give you the opportunity to build wealth. Whereas owning a home is an appreciating asset. As long as you're holding it for a long time, it is going to go up. There's never been a time that if you're holding a home at least 10 years or beyond, that you aren't going to see the upside as well as the downside during that time. But you also have made payments on that home. So you're creating the equity through appreciation and through amortization. So if it didn't appreciate at all, you still paid off the loan, which then creates that position of equity. So you have to pay for shelter. So if you can invest in a home and pay off that home, you definitely have an asset there that can help you to build wealth. And so I 100% am a home buyer coach in order to help people to achieve homeownership and maybe even buy multiple investment properties or primary residences over time that are is for their growing home or to move up because their career has expanded or they've had to move to another state, and buying a home is just the greatest experience. But where I want to look at it from is that kind of the idea that buying a home and not buying a home automatically guarantees you some generational wealth. And so I want to just put some thoughts out there. Investing in the stock market also is a way to make your money grow. You can invest in annuities. You can invest in your retirement accounts. You can invest in the stock market. You can invest in mutual funds, and your money will grow. It also, you can experience losses. And so managing that money and saving over time is going to build wealth, the same or in lieu of owning a home. But if you need that money and you take that money out, or you have to use the money, or you have to spend the money, or you invest the money into the wrong account and you do lose some money, there are certain risks with that. The risks that I see with a home are a little different than the stock market when we are considering generational wealth, because what I think about is divorce, loss, bankruptcy, timing, a choice of when to sell a home on a short term versus a long term. And one thing that people don't think about in generational wealth is the age of the generations. So if you are an individual whose parents purchased a home and you think that you're going to gain wealth off of your parents having had a home without you having had a home, and your family was young when they started. So for instance, if your mom was 20 when she had you, you could be near your 60s, and when your parents are in their 80s. And so if you haven't benefited from the generation before you and their home ownership, you're already 60. So if you haven't created that wealth on your own, you aren't actually being able to experience the wealth from the generation before you. Now, your kids, if you have kids and you have those kids young, it's potential that their grandparents could skip a generation and leave the grandkids the home, and it'll help to benefit them. But depending on their age and the value of that home, and whether that home is sold, and whether their older parents use that money or leave it to them, could determine what the next generation's benefit is from a different generation's home ownership. If a family purchases a home together and there's a loss of a spouse, and the surviving spouse cannot maintain the home and has to sell it, they could be selling it later in life, where the second and third generation do not benefit from that particular ownership of a home. There's also how the first generation might utilize the equity. How about they purchase a home and then they need to take money out of that home in order to add on to it, or remodel it, or maintain it, or put a new roof on it, or upgrade it in some way. And so they have a loan on that home, and they do have equity, but there's a loan that needs to be paid off if the next generation would get that home. Or a really, really, really important one is when people become elderly and they can't care for themselves anymore, they may need the equity or the asset to produce income for them in order for them to have care, long-term care. And so if they need to sell their house or finance their house or reverse mortgage their home in order for them to have care in their later life, then that asset's encumbered and it may not be generating wealth to the downline generation. If there's divorce in the family, if there's illness in the family, a home that they purchase could save them, or they could lose the home. So I think that I'm always thinking that just because one generation has a home, the end result may not affect or benefit, I should say, the next generation. So each generation is going to have to be in a position to generate wealth. It's basically maybe not wealth for legacy, but wealth for living. So if your parents owned a home, I look at it more as the education of the importance and the how-to of purchasing a home, maintaining a home, caring for a home, and the expenses around that. Putting on a new roof, redoing some old plumbing, getting new flooring, updating bathrooms and kitchens, um, doing repairs to the home, doing repairs to the yard. That costs money, and sometimes you will use your equity in order to do that. But you've gotten the education and you've seen the process, so then you can repeat the process. And that's where I think that generational wealth happens more so, is from being able to educate and repeat the process. And then each generation knows that the importance of home ownership, the dedication and the sacrifice that goes into home ownership, and the maintenance of the actual home over time in order to keep its value. Those things are highly important. And I think that we need to consider the educational part of wealth versus waiting for someone to leave you an asset or expecting it to be left to you and depending on that wealth in order for you to generate wealth. And I think that is not going to happen. I think that it is far better for each young individual to learn to save small amounts of money that grow and do that consistently, which we'll talk about in the next segment. So think about that, and we'll be right back.